Right, take us through the one that is 100% going to get nerfed.
Oh, this one seems fine. What are you talking about?
Then this is not going live. There is no fucking way this goes live. You consider it just straight broken.
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
Ladies and gentlemen, it has come to that time where we need to go through the Soulbinds because we're preparing to do our class looks for you. It's not a ranking. We're going to do our class looks for you, and if we include the Soulbinds into all of these things, each video is going to be about 45 minutes long, and the Soulbinds are identical, the same regardless of whether you're a healer, tank, DPS, PvP, it doesn't matter what faction you are, they're all the same. And we are glad to have back Mr. Fingal, who has... returned from a busy couple of weeks to his main job. So good to have you back, Mr. Finn.
It's good to be back. I much prefer this one.
It's much more fun. Well, maybe not this one, because what we're going to find out here, Finn, for our audience, is not all Soulbinds are created equal. There's a couple in here I still think are going to be nerfed. We'll point them out when we get there. Yeah. But our main purpose in this video is literally to point out the 1 or 2 abilities that each Soulbind has that you're probably going to care about. There is a lot of filler in here, Finn. Collecting herbs, slow fall, durability reduction when you die. A lot of filler.
Yep.
So we'll bypass that. We're going to look at each of them and get through them relatively quickly while just pointing out the obvious things. So I'm going to kick us off here with the Kyrian, and we're going to look at Mr. Pelagos. Amazingly, his best ability is actually his very, very first ability, so you're going to get this straight away as a Kyrian, which is Let Go of the Past. Using a spell or ability increases your verse by 1% for 10 seconds, and using another spell or ability increases this amount by 1% when it is not a repeat of the previous spell or ability, stacking to 5%. So it's a flat 5% versatility. You'd be surprised, even the classes, we don't play vanilla anymore. It's not classic. We don't shoot 20 frostbolts before anything happens. So keeping this buff up on nearly every class and spec is actually fine, and even if it drops, it restacks really, really quickly. I enjoyed this one immensely. I didn't think it was a problem at all. Now, in very real fashion, everything else is garbage, except for Pelagos' final ability, which is Combat Meditation. Which is using your Covenant spell gives you 5% mastery for 20 seconds and occasionally expels sorrowful memories. Walking through those memories extends that effect by 3 seconds. Now, 2 things here. One, sometimes these things spawn out of melee range. You literally have to stop DPSing to run and get them. That's really frustrating. I've seen a lot of ranged players saying, this spell's really good. I'm like, you don't even know. It's so frustrating sometimes. But it is also obviously an effect of how often you can use your Covenant spell. Some people have that on like a 2 or 3 minute cooldown. DKs can get it on like a 40-second cooldown and therefore get a generally much bigger benefit, although Blizzard has adjusted some of these to be aware of that. But generally speaking, if you have a short cooldown, it will be better.
Yeah.
Do you want to take us through Claire?
Sure. So Claire, again, similarly, the first one has a pretty decent conduit on it. It makes you immune to bleeds, curses, diseases, and poisons rather than just removing them. So it changes your vial of Serenity, I think it's called. Yep. Yeah, it's decent, but it loses your DPS conduit, so one to look out for.
And only once per combat. A lot of people don't seem to be taking that into account.
Yeah.
Is the potion's a one-time use only. It's not as powerful as people made it out to be.
Yeah, definitely not. And then next one, on the next row, she has another couple of good ones, actually. So Pointed Courage, that increases your critical strike chance by 1% for every nearby ally or enemy. So in a raid, basically 5. In a dungeon, basically 5, unless you're doing something kind of weird. And also in the same row, there's a healing one, which causes healing above 70% health, or healing done to you when you're above 70% health. 3% of that is then repeated on the target as like a hot over 3 seconds. It's really good, but again, that is the DPS conduit route, and the critical strike one is not. So you'll have to make a choice between conduits based on those two.
And then very frustrating.
And then the last one, again, she has another one at the end, Valiant Strikes, which essentially you and your nearby allies' critical strikes grant you a stack, and once you have 40 stacks, you heal yourself for 10% of your HP, and 4 allies near you for 5% of their HP over 10 seconds. So this one in raids was kind of doing a lot, but it has been nerfed since we last did raid testing, so it's still good. I don't think it's like world changing like it was previously though.
No, I actually got my notes saying this is kind of shit now, because you can't control the proc because it's based on crits that you do and your allies. You can't control that. and you just might not need the healing. It's one of those things that could be good. Likelihood is 9 times out of 10 it's an absolute waste of time, and then one time out of 10 you'll get some good usage out of it. But let's go through Forge Light. Forge Light Mechanicals is your third Soulbind that you get with the Kyrians. Now bear in mind your third Soulbind comes after the campaign, guys, so that means you are going to be weeks and weeks into the expansion before you see this, and then when you get it, it's going to be a few weeks more before you get these final abilities. So it takes quite a while to get Forge Light. The first one that is interesting is Forge Light Filter, which is changes your potion, your Kyrian potion, into an automatic hot or an automatic heal that goes off at 35% health. The interesting part about that is it's not tied to one use per combat. So you can get that benefit several times. Now, the side effect of that is going to 35% health in some content is actually expected and normal, and it's going to use the charge. So it depends on the content you're doing. But that is in the DPS row, the DPS conduit path, so you will pick that up if you choose Forge Light and you want your DPS conduit. The next one is Hammer of Genesis. That's interesting, which is damaging a new enemy grants you 2% haste for 10 seconds, up to 5 stacks. That's 10% haste. And you can play around this because it refreshes. Obviously, in Mythic Plus, things like that, you're going to get the benefit of this a lot. But as long as if you're not going in and doing like turbo AoE, you can actually keep this rolling for quite some time. Had some interesting time messing around with this one to keep this haste buff up. It'll depend on your character and class as to how effective you can make it. But you should know, not in the DPS conduit. If you want Hammer of Genesis, you cannot get the DPS conduit. I want to kind of give a little idea here. If you the way Blizzard's balance these is generally the one with the DPS conduit pathway is nothing to do with damage at all, or you can get a damage buff without getting a DPS conduit. That's their idea of balancing. So, for example, if you were to get the DPS conduit instead of Hammer of Genesis, you would end up with, after standing still for 5 seconds, incoming stun and incapacitate durations are reduced by 20%. Ultra niche, very, very low chance of being effective outside of like PvP, and you'd also have to stand still in PvP, which not many people tend to do. The final ability you'll get, which is months into the expansion, by the way, is calling Bronn. Bronn is a big mech. He's very cool. After using 90 damaging or healing spells, 90, your next spell or ability summons Bronn, knocking back enemies on arrival, and starts attacking and healing your targets for 30 seconds. Bronn is cool. He doesn't do amazing damage. He's very awesome to see running around. A little wonky. I assume they will fix this for when it goes live, but even to this day, Bronn sometimes spawns Finn, and then he just disappears. He's all over the place.
He seems to be tied to the mob that he spawns on, like the 90th spell. So if he spawns on an ad that instantly dies, he seems to die too, which is kind of frustrating. But he's cool as fuck. I love Bronn.
Yeah, he's very cool. He looks awesome. One thing I noted while testing this is that more often than not in dungeons, whether or not it was just the character I was playing on, which was a DK at the time, he would spawn as the last mob died, and then he would be entirely useless. So, obviously you're not going to run into that with every class of spec, and sometimes you are going to get the full use, but just note that I can't even express the level of frustration when playing with Bronn to have him appear as I have got nothing left to kill. So very frustrating when that actually happens as your big final ability. But let's move over to Maldraxis and take a look at two of the weakest Soulbinds in the game, along with one that we are 99% sure is going to be smashed into the ground. Finn, do you want to take us through Plague Deviser Marileth?
Yeah, sure. So actually the first ability you get with him is kind of interesting in that it gives you benefit from using Fleshcraft over a corpse. You can get base stat from this, but it's so weird and like funky to use, and you have to be over specific body types for it to give you the right stats.
There's like 15 different buffs?
Yeah, it's so strange. If you get the right buff, if you could consistently get the right buff with this, it would actually be really good, but at the moment you can't.
It varies from like 4% crit to durability restoration.
Yeah,
it's all over the place.
Yeah. And then the next one is Plagueis Preemptive Strike. So your first attack or spellcast on an enemy increases your damage done to them by 10% for 10 seconds. It's pretty solid, but again, you lose a DPS conduit for going for it. Other than that, it's a fairly decent ability, especially if you're bursting down ads. And then the rest of the tree is kind of garbage. The last one is probably pretty good for PvP, I would imagine. While you're channeling Fleshcraft, you're immune to crowd control, which could be useful if you like snap it. If you just like press the button and instantly cancel it to try and stop someone CCing you. but finishing the full channel grants you a full 4 seconds of CC immunity. I'm not sure how useful that part is, because standing still to channel for 4 seconds can't be good.
No.
Yeah, I'm not a big PvP guy myself, but that doesn't seem great. But yeah,
we did test this in PvE. It did work, and because certainly in Mythic raiding, there's no place for Fleshcraft seemingly. But it does work in some of the fights. In Mythic Plus, there are things that are CC so you can if you're getting hexed or whatever.
Yeah.
You can pull this off if no one's interrupting.
Yeah, it's definitely useful for like the initial snapshotting. So you just like start the channel and cancel it if you're going to be hexed or you're going to be sheeped or something. Like that's useful. The second part of it seems less great to me. But overall, this Soulbind is weak.
Well, doesn't get any better with our poor Princess Emily, unfortunately. One of the weakest Soulbinds in the game. The kickoff with this that makes it interesting, and unfortunately most of you are probably going to skip it, is Emily's Ambulatory Flesh. This allows you to cast Fleshcraft while moving, which actually adds some value to Fleshcraft, because if you could do it while moving between packs of enemies, then it becomes considerably more useful than it actually is now, which is standing still and then channeling. But you have to skip a DPS. No, you don't skip a DPS conduit for this. You have to get an endurance conduit, which is kind of the weakest of the three if you're a DPSer in most cases. But you can pick that up without losing a DPS conduit, which is important. So it makes this tree a little bit interesting. But other than that, not much. One of the ones I wanted to draw attention to is please be careful of walking into this. I've actually seen, I never thought I would, seen someone pulling this off in a dungeon and it drove me insane. It's Sulfuric Emission. When you're reduced below 20% health, you fear nearby enemies for 3 seconds, and it occurs once per minute. Please don't take this in PvE. Like, it obviously has a place in PvP, but I saw a guy who was a combination of both standing in things he shouldn't have, which was killing him down to 20% health, and then fearing the trash that we were killing every minute, which adds up quickly in a dungeon, by the way, is a bit of a total pain in the ass. Please don't take that. The final ability you're going to get with the princess is Embody the Construct, which is after using 60 spells or abilities, your next Fleshcraft will deal AoE shadow damage up to 5 nearby enemies over the duration, and heal up to 5 nearby allies for 2,500. Now, this is good, because Fleshcraft, like I say, I don't like Fleshcraft still, but they're trying to make Fleshcraft more interesting by giving it different uses, and you're seeing that in these Soulbinds. This one's not bad. As long as you're aware that you can pull off this AoE, then it's much better this way. You get to do this little AoE. Is it better than your ordinary AoE? But pulling it off if you're a DPS and your allies need healing in a dungeon or whatever, can be very effective, Finn.
Yeah, definitely. It's just going to be so trolly.
A little bit. That fear one is awful, by the way.
Yeah.
That guy, I was like, why are you playing that? Why? And he was like, so I don't die. I'm like, Jesus, dude. Stop standing the thing.
That's rough.
Right, take us through the one that is 100% going to get nerfed.
Oh, this one seems fine. What are you talking about? This one is totally fine. So, yeah, I guess Hyremir? I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name.
Hyremir, I believe his name is. Basically,
there's a couple of important ones. The first one is his arsenal, the Marrowed Gemstone. So after landing 10 crits, you gain 20% increased chance to crit for 20 seconds. That occurs once a minute. I'm like, okay, sure, whatever.
Can't see a problem.
Can't see a problem with this. This seems totally fine. I don't see specific classes that use high amounts of crit being able to abuse
why would you?
Shit out of that.
20% crit chance for 33% of combat seems normal to me.
Yeah, totally fine. Totally fine.
I think it's worth it. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Finn, but this is in a lot of sims. They're showing Bonesmith being by far the way. I've already seen people who are looking at these early sims saying, oh, I have to be Necrolord then. This is not going live. There is no fucking way this goes live.
I mean,
please don't do that.
Let's hope this doesn't go live. Because it's one of those weird trees where, like, this tree is entirely defined by that ability right now. Because the rest of the tree is not great. Like, it doesn't really give you that much. The only other thing you get is the fighting on death thing. So
Forgeborn Reveries.
Yeah, you do like 50% damage and healing for 10 seconds after you die. The fun thing about this, it's still working from me previously testing it, is if you take this as a tank, you hold threat even after you die.
Yep.
Like, you don't drop threat even though you drop to 50% damage and stuff, so that's kind of useful. But as a DPS, I don't know. I'd rather die and be rezzed, if I'm totally honest.
It's terrible. It's absolutely awful. Yeah, I was trying to think of some... after I played this, one, I didn't realize it had happened to me because nothing else happens. Your character's dead, but you kind of look the same because your armor's still fighting. You're like a floating set of armor. So I didn't realize I died, and my damage just disappeared. And every single time, it was just frustrating. Yeah. In PvP, sure, you're going to get those moments where you're both down to like 10%. And if one of you can fight on for a little bit longer doing damage, then you're going to win.
Yep.
But generally speaking, it's not as good as people hoped it would be.
No.
That's for sure.
Entire tree defined by one thing.
Yeah, if that thing goes... Yeah, it's really, really good. If that thing goes, I think all the Necrolord trees are the worst in the game.
Yes.
From my perspective, they're absolutely awful. Moving on to one that got to amazing one, though.
I was going to say, moving on to the best in the game.
Of course. It would be the Night Fae. I hate the Night Fae so much. Right, we're going to kick off with Naya. Naya has a couple of things going for her that are really good. However, they are... Let's start with the big one, which is actually end one, which is Grove Invigoration. Now, Grove Invigoration is the end one, so it's going to take months to unlock this. Healing or dealing damage has a chance to grant you a stack of redirected anima, up to 10. Using your Covenant ability grants you 1% max health and 35 mastery per stack for 30 seconds. Now, after trying this out, it's really just the max health. It takes so long, guys, to stack this up that you are never going to get that 10 stacks unless you intentionally don't use your Covenant spell for like 4 or 5 minutes. It takes ages to stack this thing up. So the mastery is neither here nor there because it's only 35 per stack, but getting the 1% max health, very useful in a lot of scenarios for a lot of different classes.
Yeah.
Liked this one a lot. The other one I really wanted to point out with Naya is actually Naya's Tools Herbs. Your healing spells, this works off self-heals away as well, so you can use it as a rogue if you're putting your vial up and all those kinds of things. You have a chance to proc 5% haste for 10 seconds. That's really good. Like 5% haste for 10 seconds is really good, especially if you're aware of it. Now, you do have to note, though, as always, you've got to skip that DPS conduit in order to get it. Wah, wah, wah.
I want to call it another one on her tree, though.
Go for it.
Run without tiring is big.
Oh, you like this?
Yeah. So, when in Soulshape, you regenerate 5% of your max health every 3 seconds. So that ticks 4 times, 20% of your HP, and some classes can cast during it. So
that's true.
It's just a 20% HP hot. Especially if you're a ranged or a caster, you can pretty much cast all your stuff during it. So it's kind of big.
And you get a DPS conduit with it. It's your very first ability.
Yes.
So you don't give up a DPS conduit to have access to that. I'll give you the fun one then. You take Dreamweaver.
Oh, I get Dreamweaver? Oh, there's so much. Okay.
I know.
Let's start at the very beginning. So Feel the Blossoms. Class ability puts flowers at your feet. And if you stand in them, you get 10% haste. That's fine.
That's awesome.
That seems okay. Yeah, they last 10 seconds. They occur every minute. It's actually pretty consistently like procs on CD from what I saw as well. So it's up as frequently as you can make it, and you don't lose any slots for selecting the first one, obviously.
It is Rune of Power style, but I mean, usually you are thinking about, can I stand still if you're going to use your nuke abilities anyway? Yeah. So it works out pretty well.
So then we've got Social Butterfly, which you lose a DPS conduit for, but essentially it's 5% verse for 5 seconds, and then it expires and it passes to 2 nearby allies who gain, was it 2% verse?
Yeah, they get 40%.
Yeah, so and then they pass it back to you 5 seconds later. So
50% uptime.
Yeah, 50% uptime, 5% verse, and 2 allies get 2% verse for the rest of the 50%. So yeah, also pretty good. Generally seems like a really strong thing to use.
Yeah, broken, you mean?
Yeah, broken. So similarly, Empowered Chrysalis. This also loses a DPS conduit, but 10% of your overhealing applies as a shield, lasting 5 seconds, and it's up to 10% of your max HP. We had some people doing some funky stuff in raid testing with this. Like,
this is low key incredible.
Yeah, like popping Trank before we pulled the boss, sort of stuff. Just to get the overhealing shield on everyone. So yeah, this has some weird synergies and is really strong, I think.
It is. We had some healers testing this out because they were like, wait a minute, this gives us damage reduction And some of us have some spells which aren't great at actually their raw healing, like Revival. So what we can actually use Revival as an AoE power word barrier, right? Like we can actually do stuff like that. And even if you're tanking, because it's 10% of your overhealing. So if you're a tank and you're overhealing, you're still gaining the shield. It's based on your caster's health. So if you're a tank with massive HP pool, I've seen tanks using like overhealing themselves to gain a better shield before a big impact.
Yeah.
This thing's pretty wacky. It really is. But you can't get a throughput conduit for it, which is hilarious.
Yeah, you lose the throughput, but could outweigh it. It seems pretty strong right now. Yeah. And the last thing that Dreamweaver has is cheat death, which, you know, that's fine.
Kind of. I mean, it's pretty shit.
It's pretty rubbish because if you die to something, like if you stand in a circle that's on the ground, the pod also is in the circle. So the pod needs to take less than 30% of your HP over 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's 50%. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially.
No, it's 50% of your health if it doesn't take that. It gives you 30%.
It tries
health.
to regenerate you. And if you take too much damage while in the pod, you'll die anyway.
Yeah.
Which is, again, similar to the Bonesmith one, where you become a skeleton that fights. I'd kind of rather just die instantly and be rezzed rather than this. It only occurs every 30 minutes as well. And from me trialing it out in dungeons and stuff, it doesn't reset on death or anything like that.
No.
So
it looks pretty.
Yeah, it looks cool. It looks fun. I don't think it's entirely useful. It's helpful to have a cheat death, don't get me wrong. If you can get out the ability that kills you, you'll probably be fine, but it's very rare that happens.
I feel like this is the ability, Finn, where, you know, the same guys who will PvP for 6 hours, lose 9 out of 10 BGs, but then have that one where they crit someone and kill them, and then they make the video of that. I feel like we're going to see Pod Tender coming clutch and someone making a video about it and being like, wow, Pod Tender's OP, ignoring the 175 times it didn't do anything of useful whatsoever.
Yeah, we'll say this, and like Limit will kill Denathrius, and it'll be one guy stuck in a pod that's the only person alive, like guaranteed.
100%, because that does kind of work out. Like, you know, things will be, you're still technically in the fight as you're sat in your little pod. As long as you don't take any damage, you'll be all right. I'll take Kyrian then. So Kyrian has like a really interesting row to Kyrian. So Kyrian is your third Soulbind. So again, weeks and weeks and weeks before you even see Kyrian. Let's kick off with First Strike then. So damaging an enemy before they damage you. So that works for pretty much everybody. Increases your crit chance by 20% for 10 seconds. Now, I've played around with this a little bit recently, and if you're not going in and like straight AoEing, like for an example, you need to individually pick out targets, you could like move this around in combat. As the 10 seconds runs out, you can move to a target and gain that critical strike chance again. So you can move it around in a number of different ways. You have to skip a DPS conduit for it, but playing around it in the right scenario is really good. Something you want to bear in mind. The other one, if you don't take a DPS conduit, is Hold the Line, which is after standing still for 5 seconds, you take 10% less physical damage until you move. That's huge. In a lot of cases, you can really get away with some cool stuff with this, even as a massive DPS. Yeah, 10% is so big. That I was thinking about a couple of fights like Stone Legion Generals, things like that, where there is massive physical damage going out on people, and if you just stand still for a few seconds, 10% less puts you back in the fight and can save your life.
I just think as a tank, this thing is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's so strong.
It is. You're definitely probably going to miss out on the DPS conduit to get that, because to just have a flat 10% physical damage reduction on you is so huge. If you do want the DPS conduit, though, you do pick up Face Your Foes, which isn't actually terrible. When in front of your target, your spells and abilities decrease the damage they inflict on you by 2%. So you do have to be in front of the target. It only lasts 2 seconds, so the moment you move out of being in front of the target, it drops almost instantly. However, as melee, this is pretty trash, but as ranged, you can be in front of the bosses pretty safely in a lot of instances in Castle Nathria and in Mythic Plus. And there's a lot of fights where the boss, the guys actually turn the boss to face the raid, meaning you will always take 2% less damage in that environment. 2% obviously not anywhere near 10%, but it's still pretty significant over the course of some of the massive damage spikes you're going to see in the raid. So that's if you pick up the DPS conduit. Just be aware you have the ability to take less damage. The final ability you'll get, which is going to be a good 3 months plus into the fight, is very good, which is Wild Hunt Tactics. Your damage to targets above 75% health and healing to targets below 35% health is increased by 10%. it's a mixed bag, but obviously in Mythic Plus, you're going to be regularly fighting enemies that are above 75% health and have 10% increased damage all the time, practically. And also, some bosses have a huge portion of the fight and spawn things later in the fight, which you get to take advantage of this all the time. And a lot of people telling me that, like, oh, well, yeah, but once the boss is below 75%, then it's dead. It's like, well, there's no bosses really like that. There's a couple that are just straight up the boss, but in a lot of cases, they're spawning adds, they're spawning lieutenants later on, they're respawning things. Certainly important fights like Stone Legion Generals and Denathrius do that throughout all their phases, where you can get good benefit to this. And obviously, you've got that emergency heal aspect that'll happen all the time when you need to emergency heal, because it's below 35% health. So I actually rate this ability quite highly, as also when you are getting the benefit of this, so when you have 75% damage dealing or 35% low health, you get 10% increased movement speed as well. So it allows you to move around very quickly. I consider this to be pretty solid compared to some of the things we've seen in the past.
I think this thing is broken.
You consider it just straight broken?
Yeah, this is ridiculous. Damage to targets above 75% health and healing to targets below 35 is increased. Yeah, it's madness. I think it's so crazy. The amount of fights you lost on pool is insane, and you just have 10% flat damage buff for like the entire duration. Yeah, it comes to me to how relevant that damage is. I kind of always go back to not Algalon, but the guy who was like Algalon that was in the Nighthold, where, you know, the first percentages of the first 50% didn't matter. It was all about the execute. I think about it in that respect, but this buff comes back up all the time. If you think, I mean, you'd agree with me. You've done the Nathria testing. There's only Shriekwing, Sludge Fist, and Hungering Devourer that don't have that ability. And if I think of something like Sludge, don't spawn ads, I should say. If I think about Sludge Fist Fin, that's the DPS check of Castle Nathria, like the big one. But you multiply the whole raid doing 10% more damage at the start, you might shave off a huge amount of time, allowing you to do extra damage later on. Oh yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? There are a lot of considerations with these soulbinds like that. Let's go to our final one then, that is the Venthea. The Night Fate, obviously very good. If you want to kick us off with Nadia.
Nadia, yes.
Nadia. That's one of the most interesting ones in there.
Yeah, so Nadia's interesting. There's a little one at the start that I'm kind of interested to see how it works, especially in M+, with Agent of Chaos. When you Door of Shadows into like an area, all the enemies in that area are disoriented for 6 seconds. Disorient is obviously broken by damage, but if you're jumping into a caster pack, this seems kind of useful to me. I've used it a couple of times just to like disorient stuff in Torghast as well. So yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I've seen a lot of Mythic Plus groups now. Obviously, Venthea is kind of it's not quite the go-to, but it's still extremely strong because of Door of Shadows. But even if you can't skip or do anything with it, you're not wrong, is people are using this as an AoE interrupt. Which is, if you reread this and say you have an AoE interrupt, then you start to realize the potential of this. Because you could just Door of Shadows in and AoE interrupts everything. Yeah. That's so big in a lot of occasions to add that to every single class and spec. Yeah.
And then she has two more further down, slightly further down, around Renown 24. So this is like a few weeks in. But Dauntless Duelist is the first one. So the first enemy you damage in combat is marked as your adversary, and you deal 4% more damage to them, and they deal 2% less to you. It's pretty solid. It feels really single target when using it. It's like you don't get to chop and change around like some of the other ones we've had, where like you get crit when you hit your first enemy. It doesn't really change like that. But for single target fights, or like fights where boss damage is key, this seems really, really good.
The cool thing about it is it does move in combat if your adversary dies.
Yes.
So because I was worried about this, if we look at something like Queen Ashara, where you deal with her lieutenants before she even appears, and you'd be like, oh well, I get this buff for like a useless part of the fight. That kind of sucks. But the way it actually works is if your adversary dies, your next enemy you attack will then become your adversary. So it is single target, like Finn says, but you will eventually be able to move it to something important. If you're playing around, even if you don't get to attack them first, which is very cool.
Yep, and you obviously lose a DPS conduit because of this. Of course you do.
Of course you do.
Now, here's one that maybe a week ago I would have been really excited about. I'm less excited about it now, but Exacting Preparation. So the benefits of well-fed flask and weapon enchants are increased by 15%. What I will say is that weapon enchants do a lot of damage right now, especially.
And some people have too.
Yeah, and most people have too. I would imagine you're going to run 2 on most things, just because of stuff like weapon enchants. But yeah, the 15% flat buff to them, it's pretty solid. It was really amazing before when the panda stuff was in, but now that that's been fixed, it's less impactful. Still pretty good though.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I think
it's only going to get better
watching
as the expansion goes on as well.
That's my feeling on it. Like both this and Dauntless Duelist are really, really strong. Like 4% flat damage is nothing to be sneezed at. If I think back to our benthic belts, that was 2%, and it dwarfed absolutely everything, even though it was like 50 item levels behind. Like 2% flat damage is huge, and this is 4%. And this one is just going to get better, especially as like Finn says, as our stats increase over time. The percentages are certainly on certain things, and it's going to be like...
Yeah.
You do have to skip a DPS conduit for either of those, though.
Yeah,
you
for
lose
both
DPS
of them.
conduit.
Yeah. And then the last one that's interesting is sort of the last one in the row. So Thrill Seeker. So while in combat, you gain a stack of Thrill Seeker every 2 seconds, or you get 4 stacks for killing an enemy. And once you reach 40, you get 20% haste for 10 seconds. And then that 20% haste rapidly decays while you're... Well, sorry, the stacks rapidly decay while you're not in combat. So it feels really M+ heavy, this one. You just slaughter your way through a dungeon. Hopefully you proc the 20% haste as you get to a boss or a big pack, and you can just blast for 10 seconds. It felt kind of weird to use in raid. It was happening at random times and stuff like that.
It takes forever as well.
Yeah.
Like, I think when me and Nups did our Soulbind testing, he was looking at like 2.5 minutes to get it actually going. Or a couple of wrecks anyway, so maybe 2 minutes. That's assuming you're not killing anything. Waiting for it to actually manually stack up and proc, it does take a while, similar to Grove Invigoration.
If you're not doing anything, it takes 80 seconds to stack.
Yeah.
Which is, too long, pretty much.
It's too long, yeah, because, but it is 20%, and what we did notice, just to come back to this, what we did notice is that Thrill Seeker was the difference between our warriors when our gear got better. Like the 20%, because it's not rating based, so it wasn't being as heavily hit by DR and things, actually made a big difference. Like the stronger our gear got when we scaled up gear, the more and more effective Thrill Seeker became. Even though it was a low proc. So if you put it in an environment where it procs way more often, like Mythic Plus, it gets really strong.
Yeah.
I'll take us over to the Mad Duke. I love this character.
He's my favorite one.
He is. He's such a fantastic character. His Soulbind is okay. It's got one of the most frustrating things in here. One thing I wanted to bring up was Leisurely Gate, which gives you 2 stacks of Door of Shadows, which is the fix to it being instant cast. So you might remember instant cast Door of Shadows, and a lot of us saying, this is God mode, I love this, please have my babies. Blizzard then took it away from us. But they replaced it with this, where you have 2 charges, which many people actually believe to be, if not stronger in many ways, because you can cover a massive distance. You could also move out last second with debuffs, move back in immediately, cover so much distance that reduction in travel distance and travel time is always a passive net gain. So very strong, but you do have to give up a DPS conduit for it. Will depend on your options of DPS conduits in order to pick up Leisurely Gate. The next one, this entire row is kind of hilarious. So as long as you're not bothered about DPS conduits, Theotar is for you. Refined Palette. I'm glad you're here for this, Finn. The effects of combat potions last anywhere from 20% to 100% longer. Why?
RNG.
Why? Because this is so powerful in the right hands, especially if you have a big... If you have a druid that uses, like, Ravenous Frenzy, and having all the extra potion time with it as well, frig, dude.
I mean,
it could be pretty good.
It's just annoying. Why is it a random value? Just make it...
Between 80%.
Just make it a static value. Like, it's going to feel really bad if yours lasts 20% longer, and the guy playing the same class in your dungeon or raid lasts 100% longer. It's going to feel bad.
Well, especially as potions are so strong now. That's why they're a 5-minute cooldown. They're big. Potions are big now. So dumb. But you have to skip a DPS conduit, which will be more consistent. Symbol is Soothing Shade. So your spells and abilities have a chance to call Tubbins and Gubbins, who are great characters in the story. I'm sure you'll love them. To your side for 12 seconds. Parasol in hand, which is an umbrella, for those of you who don't know what that is. And standing in that shaded area grants you 350 mastery. So it is a rune of power type ability. You have to be in the shade to get it. Also worth noting that it is rating. So if you're a heavy mastery class, you're likely to get less and less benefit from this thing. Although looking at the stat weight sims, Finn, I'm sure you've seen some. They're pretty wacky right now.
Yes.
So we'll see how that actually works out in game. But you do, again, have to skip the DPS conduit to get either of those things. The final ability you're going to get is Wasteland Propriety, which is that your Covenant spell, whatever it might be, signals the start of tea time, granting 10% verse to you and 4% verse to up to 4 nearby allies and lasts 40 seconds. So this is the difference you're seeing. Because Ashen Hallow, I'm looking at this on my Paladin, Ashen Hallow is a huge, huge cooldown, 4-minute cooldown, then I get 40 seconds of it from my ability, whereas other classes will get different durations depending on their Covenant spell.
Yeah, the base is 10, I think.
Yeah, I think it's like for every... They tried to done like every minute of the cooldown adds another 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But this thing, certainly if you're using it with multiple players in your group, 10% verse, god damn. And this is going to be something people are definitely... I know, I've spoke to the top guilds in the world recently about this kind of stuff, and they were like, yeah, well, you know, being able to have this as a raid cooldown, essentially, just hold on to your Covenant spell for like 10 seconds, and we're going to give everybody, like, all this versatility buff. 4% verse on everybody. You only need... Because it's up to 4 nearby allies, you can kind of play around with positioning and stuff. Makes this excruciatingly strong in the right scenario, Finn.
It's also a crazy DPS cooldown.
Yep.
So I was using this when we were raid testing on my monk. So you had all your CDs, the monk little, like, mirrors with all the little monks coming out, Bloodlust, and 10% verse for 20 seconds. It's nuts. It's so much. Yeah,
Really
this thing slaps. It really does.
Do you want to take us to our final one, which is Tanky Boy Draven?
Can I just say as well, by the way, the Mad Duke got the free transmog removed, and I'm not that happy about it.
Did he really?
Yeah, it's not there
I
anymore.
never even saw... Oh, F. Useless Soulbinds.
Ripping the chat.
Stick your
hate
verse up your
Soulbinds,
ass.
fix them. Yeah, so General Draven, or Draven, however you want to call him, built for war is probably the first decent one. So while you're above 80% health, you gain 1% primary stat every 3 seconds, stacking 5 times. If you fall below 50% health, it's lost. So there is a little bit of punishment if you get hit by stuff, or if there's just unavoidable damage, this might not be that great. But I remember, what was the... There was a ability in BOD where you were above like a certain amount of HP, you got stat. I cannot remember what it was called. It was one of the Azerite powers. But everyone thought initially, like, oh, you'd be taking so much damage that it won't have much uptime. And it had like 80% uptime, because you're pretty much top.
Yeah, I mean, it only takes 15 seconds to get that stat to full.
Yeah.
It only takes 15 seconds above 80%.
Yeah.
And it immediately stacks when you get to 80%. It's not like you have 100% uptime of 5%, but it's always stacking. And the thing is, we just mentioned earlier, main stat is incredible in the Shadowlands.
It's really strong. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is generally a pretty good ability. You'll have more uptime than you think you will on this one as well, but you lose a DPS conduit, obviously.
Obviously.
Superior Tactics is also good. So when you interrupt an enemy or dispel an ally, you gain 10% critical strike chance for 10 seconds. Now this can occur every 30 seconds, and you interrupt stuff all the time in M+, for example. This seems really strong. But you lose a DPS conduit, obviously.
I feel like... Chris, can we have that on some sort of repeat?
You just clip that last bit and then replay it over and over again. But you lose a DPS conduit, obviously. Yeah, so Hold Your Ground is also good. This is standing still for at least 4 seconds, grants you 10% stamina and 4% increased healing done. And it persists for 4 seconds after you start moving.
Including self-heals. It's wacky.
DK tank, hello?
Hello?
Yeah, this seems really strong, and you get a potency conduit, you get a DPS conduit with it. So this seems ridiculous, especially for healers and tanks. So yeah, really, really good. And then Service in Stone is his last one, and damage taken below once you go below 40% health, your damage taken is reduced by 10%. And then when you die, you leave a stone husk behind, which shatters after a couple of seconds and inflicts 100% of your max health split among nearby enemies, and healing for 100% of your max health split among allies.
I've yet to. I wish I would have found somebody who was trying to manip this.
Yeah, I've not seen anyone use it properly.
I haven't seen anyone use it. It might be something we could mess around with, Finn. We might be able to do something really fun with this.
Yeah.
Where we get 5 people with Service and Stone and see what we can have happen. Like 5 tanks, 5 Guardian Druids with Service and Stone. Let us all die at the same time if we could pull it off. But that is a huge AoE. It's really AOE. Strong.
I actually think the heal is better than the DPS, but yeah, I think it's good.
It's kind of cool because if General Draven is considered to be the tank one, that if you are the tank and you do die, that you are going to heal that whole group. And AoE down whatever killed you. Like if you know how often you get into like raging or something like that in Mythic Plus, and it's literally like on 3% as the tank dies, then and that one raging mob is like going to tear ass through the rest of your group, is that you will die and then maybe kill it afterwards and save the group. So there's definitely, I'm really interested to see this thing in action, but try as I might, I have not seen anybody using it, and that might be because Draven only recently got unlocked for usage on the beta. Well, that does bring us to the end, Finn. They're all over the place.
Yeah, they're kind of mad.
Yeah, the Soulbinds are all over the place. Some of them are absolutely tragically bad. Certainly looking at Necrolord, just garbage. And then some of them just seemingly have... Certainly if you look at Dreamweaver and Kyrian, you've just got some absolutely insane buffs there. Same with Nadia. And this is, again, why people are a little pissed, Finn, that some of these Soulbinds are just so much better than their counterparts in the same Covenant that... It's yes, you can technically spec out other Soulbinds to go with your different specs or different content, but you are way, way, way inferior by doing so.
I mean, just play Navy. To be honest.
God, it does seem to be the way we're going. But there you go, guys. Those are the important things your Soulbinds are doing. I hope that helped you out in trying to understand the comparisons, times, and why the Soulbinds are still something we should pay attention to. I personally still think we're going to see nerfs to Bonesmith Hermia for definite. Mm-hmm. What's the other one? Dreamweaver?
I think you'll see Dreamweaver nerfs. I think you might see a little bit of Kyrian adjustment. And yeah, maybe Nadia.
Maybe Nadia. Yeah, they've generally tried to squash the Soulbinds to be less relevant and more flavor, but some of these are still providing obscene amount of buffs, so we'll see how that goes. Thank you so much for listening, guys. And as you can tell, we only went through the important spells and we still hit like 40 minutes. Imagine if we'd gone through everything.
Oh, God, yeah.
Nightmare. So have a great day, guys, and we'll see you soon. Great to have you back, Finn.
Oh, great to be back.
Goodbye.
Bye.